Okay, so for those of you guys who just joined us, right, a warm welcome. So for today, we're covering on our live analysis session, and we'll just get the session started in a minute, right? So if you have any questions, just feel free to put them under the questions chat. Okay, so let's kickstart today's session. Right, so for today, we're covering mainly on our live analysis session. We'll be going through a few setups. Focusing for today, I'll be focused on dollar index and euro dollar. Any setups that you want us to take a look at, to just feel free to put them under the questions chat. So just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Lee Sing. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So if you're watching a recording of this and if you have any questions, right, with regards to the content that's presented, right, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Just a quick disclaimer, the information presented here is not to be treated as investment advice. It's for educational purposes only. So this is the agenda that we will be covering for today. Right, first we will take a look at the key economic events. So this can be either on our Forex Factory calendar or on Vantage Markets. Right, so we will hop onto that in a moment, following which I'll be taking a look at some trade setups. Right, so for today, I want to focus on dollar yen. Sorry, not dollar yen, dollar index, euro dollar and gold. Right, so those are the setups that we will take a look at. And of course, along the way, if there are any questions, right, please feel free to either type them in the chat box that we have in this app, right? Or if you have any questions when you're watching a recording of this, right, you can either leave a comment below or feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Okay, so this is the agenda that we will be covering for today, right? So for a start, let's hop onto our economic calendar. Okay, so this is our economic calendar. So you can just go to forexfactory.com, or another one would be to just go to vantagemarkets.com, and under educational tools, right, there is an economic calendar. So for this, right, I just want to filter it according to the higher impact news events. So I'll take out the low impact news events and I will filter it according to the high impact and medium impact news events. So you can see that coming up for today, right, mainly we have Canadian, US, right? So Chairman Jerome Powell speaking. We also have Canada's data coming up, right? So retail sales data. So this would be a reflection of how domestic growth is doing and whether interest rates, the high interest rate environment is actually curbing in consumption. So this is on the education, the economic calendar. Right, now let's take a look at our setup. So for our setup, I'll just go to trading view, right? So maybe before going to the setups, let me just show this. Right, so some of you guys have been asking where we can find the recordings. It's actually on Vantage YouTube page. So you can just go to previous recordings, right? And just, these are all the recorded sessions that we do, right? We do have webinars on a daily basis, right? So you can see the schedule here. So for this, you can just go to vantagemarkets.com/webinars. Scroll to the bottom of the page and you can see that this is the schedule, right? So we have it on a daily basis. So you can just sign up for the different topics, right? Here. So that it's for the educational sessions. If you want to have a recording of the previous session, you can access them here. Okay, so with that, let's go to trading view. So as I mentioned, right, for today, I want to look at euro dollar as well as gold. So that will be the main focus for today. Okay, so this is what we will be looking at for today. Right, so this is on euro dollar. Right, so before any of the setups, as always, you want to take a look at the impact of the events for a start. Right, so previously we mentioned on euro dollar. So right now, let's take a look at the dollar index as well as the rest of the stuff. Right, so for a start, let's go to dollar index. I'll just remove these drawings. So again, as with every setup, right, we want to focus on the higher time frames first. So if you take a look at dollar index, right, I'll just remove, in fact, not the drawings, but rather the Bollinger Bands, right? So yesterday we were doing a session on Bollinger Band. So the use of Bollinger Bands, how to interpret them, and how we can apply them to our setups. So let's take a look at just where dollar index is right now, right? So you can see that on dollar index, right, for one, when we go to the higher time frames, so usually the weekly, the daily, right, these are higher time frames. Weekly, daily just means that each candle's movement, it's the movement for that day, right? So if it's a daily time frame, then the candle itself captures the open, high, low, and close price for that day, right? And if it's a monthly time frame, then essentially for the whole month, right, it tracks the highest price, the open price, close price, and lowest price, and plots that candlestick. So right now on the higher time frame, you can see that these are the time frames that are less choppy because it's a wider range, right, as compared to putting it on the 5 minutes time frame where every structure on the 5 minutes might not hold as well. So in this case, on the weekly time frame, you can see that right now prices are testing this zone, right, or rather sitting on this area, right, resistance and support level. So this whole region that we are seeing here, right? So price came in, wicked slightly a few times, right? And currently it's still sitting on this region on the weekly. And if you focus on the most recent moves, you can see that we could be seeing some kind of resistance levels that prices are coming into, right? So depending on how you draw the support resistance zones, right? Generally, I prefer horizontal levels where price interacted with multiple times. You can see this is an example of a region, right? Price coming in to test this as a support twice, broke and retested as a resistance. So that's one, right? So these are zones that we want to look at. So that's the picture on the weekly, right? Previously, when we did the analysis on dollar index, we were bullish here, right? And we explained the reason for the bullish move, right? If you take a look at it, not only is it sitting on the monthly demand, right? We are also starting to see consolidation, right? So price consolidating, basically moving sideways before a clear break above structure. So we saw a break above structure and this interchange of demand supply zones, right? So supply zones were going through, right? You can see that price came in and then acknowledges the wick. So it acknowledges the extremes, right? Or basically the wicks of these zones as supply, right? So we saw how supply chain follows through until this region, right? Where we saw that change in hands between supply failing, creating demand, right? And when supply fails, it creates demand and vice versa. So back then we were calling for price to push into this demand area before it continues to the upside. But you can see this in this case, right? Price just broke above the ascending channel, right? So this breakout is also represented by a strong bullish candlestick pattern. So this is something else that it's important to watch, right? So if you base it on just market structure alone, right, on the 4 hours time frame, currently we are seeing bullish market structure, right? So again, in forms of higher lows, higher highs. Here, so this also explains why when dollar index is bullish, right, we're seeing, especially against the other currencies, we're seeing bearish moves. So if you take a look at euro dollar has been on a recent move down. Right? So it's been on a pretty strong downtrend for the past 1 to 2 weeks, right, when dollar index strengthened. So yeah, so this is on the 4 hours time frame. So right now where we are on the 4 hours, you can see that these demand regions are still areas that were left unmitigated. Essentially, price did not come into these demand areas before it pushed higher, right? And right now what we're seeing on the 4 hours, it's that we still have this channel. So we probably have to adjust this channel slightly so that it fits with the most recent price movements. Right, so in this case, it's still an ascending channel. You can see over here, right? But price broke above the resistance of this ascending channel, right? So it's just something for us to take note of, right? That currently prices are sitting on a potential demand region. But again, if it sits on this demand zone, right? Or just this looking at this ascending channel alone, right? If you look at what we have, so supply regions that fail can act as demand. Right, so likewise, if I expand this across, you can see that this was the previous supply, price broke above it and currently sitting on it as a demand or support. So that's the picture on the 4 hours, right? But again, if we are seeing any movements on the 4 hours or before we see a huge move up, you can see that what happens is that we'll usually see consolidation around this area, right? So price pushing into this zone, right? On the lower time frame, this would give us a bearish structure. So lower lows, lower highs before it consolidates and break above the area. And that structure, it's also a clue that price could be respecting this demand zone to continue to the upside. So right now we're not seeing any of this price change or structure change within the lower time frame, right? So if you're on the 15 minutes time frame, you can see that right now on the 15 minutes, prices are sitting on this potential resistance area, right? Of course, this is ignoring the fact or ignoring the higher time frames direction, right? Looking at pure support resistance areas. So this is something to watch. And if you notice on the 15 minutes, right, this whole leg up that we're seeing, right, this whole move up before we see was a pretty strong bullish channel. So in this case, right, what we would need to watch, excuse me, right? So what we would need to watch is that if price comes back into this zone as a bullish channel, price comes back into the zone to test this as a demand area, right? So this is one region that we will need to watch out for as well. Okay, so price could push deeper into the zone, right? And following which, right, if we are seeing any signs of a change in reversal, that will first be reflected on your lower time frame. Okay, so that's the picture for dollar index, right? Let's take a look at euro dollar. So if there are any other setups that you want us to take a look at as well, right, please feel free to put them under the chat box. Okay, so let's take a look at euro dollar. So again, we want to start from the higher time frame. Let me just open up a new chart so that's clearer. So as usual, we start from the higher time frame. So in this case, the monthly or the weekly, you can see that where we are currently, right, we have a support and resistance area, price coming in, testing this zone. If you're on the monthly time frame, you can see that this was a clear level previously, right, price coming in to test this area, and currently we're seeing rejection below this zone. That's the picture on the monthly time frame. If we go down to the weekly time frame, you can see that the most recent move up, right? So if we focus on just the weekly zone itself, right? Focusing on this portion of the chart, right? So as I shared in earlier sessions, I like to take a look at how candlesticks react or interact with one another. So if we're seeing this extremely long wicks, right, what this represents on the lower time frame, it's basically structure, right? So price rejecting this area, consolidating before it broke above the resistance zone. So even though it is a very relatively long wick, right, you can see that in the on the higher time frame, right, even when this shows just a huge rejection below a key, probably a supply region that price came into, right? If you move to the daily or even the 4 hours, right, the same wick itself, this is actually a reflection of a resistance area here, right? So you can see that this wick that we're seeing, that we circle on the weekly time frame, it's basically a resistance area that we're seeing here. So price coming into this zone, we're seeing that multiple rejection of this area before it broke above structure. Right, so going back to the weekly time frame, you can see that this zone where we are at, right, price came in, and notice how price reacted below this region, right? So if we talk about supply demand areas, or even if you want to look at just interaction between buyers and sellers, this area itself, it's a supply zone, right? You can see this region. So this area was supply, and supply failed, created our demand. And again, you can see demand holding, right? So price coming into this region, holding above the demand before it continues to the upside. And along the way, we can see this demand zones, the price came into, tap it, broke above, and continue to the upside, right? If you focus or you move down to the daily, we're seeing the same thing happen as well, right? So you see this relatively long wicks, right? So looking for mainly doji-like candlestick patterns, right? So if it's a doji, which just means that it has very small body as compared to the candles, as compared to the wicks, right? Then what this shows is a tug of war between buyers sellers, right? A lot of uncertainty before price decides to move in one direction. So in this case, right, this usually represents a range on the lower time frame. So when price breaks above or below this range, right, then this range itself would serve as an indication of that change in between the exchange between buyers and sellers, essentially. So in this case, you can see that this is again supply, right? So supply coming in, and when supply fails, it creates demand. So this is our demand, right? So this is the demand zone, and you can see price came in, mitigate into this demand zone, and then it continued to the upside, right? And this follows through. So again, if I had to highlight just the extreme of this whole candle itself, right? So just follow through with the demand zone. Right, price came in again over here. And yeah, if we follow through with it, you can see basically this region, right? And the last candlestick pattern that we have, or the last area where we're seeing that huge move, is actually this candle here, right? So if I were to just continue this demand area, we're seeing that reaction of this zone. And this is the last candle that we saw the reaction here, right? Over here, and we're seeing equal highs that are being formed. And you can see this again change in hands. There's demand, right? Again, this range itself, this doji, on the daily time frame, if you go to, let's say, the 1 hour time frame, you can see that it's actually a range, right? So price came in, we saw a clear sign of structure, a low being formed before price breaks below the low, right? So this is the first sign that there is a change in structure, which will be in line with the higher time frames order flow. Okay, so on the higher time frame, if it's showing bullish signs, right, then in this case, right, we want to see a clear break in structure, which is provided here, right? So if you're on the daily, you can see that on the daily, this is basically a doji. Price came in, reacted before it failed, and once demand fails, it creates supply. So then this becomes our supply, and so on and so forth, right? So you can see this, right? And coming into this zone, right, notice that price on the monthly, we've marked out that prices were sitting on a monthly zone, right? Recall the support resistance area that we've marked out. On the monthly, I'll just lift this in gray so that's easier to it's easier for us to visualize, right? So in this case, we have the supply zone, right? On the daily time frame, you can see that prices did slight pullbacks along the way. But again, right, if you're on the daily, if I put it in close, you can see just pointing out the peaks and troughs. You can see subsequent lower lows and lower highs being formed, right? Just marking out the peak and troughs. And this is also clear on the 4 hours time frame, right? And we're seeing some kind of descending trend line being formed on the 4 hours as well. Okay, or even a descending channel. So in this case, right, this is our descending channel. So you can see, right, lower lows, lower highs being formed. For descending channel to be valid, we need a tap of at least the resistance and support level twice, right? So this would be our channel. Okay, so you can see here, right, price forming lower lows and lower highs coming into this zone. And for a channel to be considered valid, right, we need a tap of resistance, support level twice here. So that's currently what we're seeing. Okay, so where we are now on the 4 hours on euro dollar, right? So we want to mark out again our resistance. So we have highlighted this descending channel, right? So if you look at just support resistance level alone, right, over here, we have an area, right? Demand turn support, or demand turn supply, right? Or support turn resistance area, right? So this is one. So this zone, and even if you take a look at the most recent price interactions, right, you can see price coming in to test it. We saw a retest of this region, so we could see a retest again, right? Price pushing into this zone if it continues to the downside. That's one, right? So this is the first zone that we've highlighted. So having highlighted this zone, right, what we can do next is to check if there are any other elements that line up with the zone. So an example of an indicator, right, or even a level, right? So if you use, if you're familiar with Fibonacci retracements, extensions, right, then those are tools that we can use. If we're looking at, right now, this is on the 4 hours time frame, right, is a bearish trend forming your bearish market structure, lower lows, lower highs. So we can also use trend following indicator just on the leg itself, right? So if prices are holding below the moving average or even Ichimoku cloud, that's something that we can consider. Okay, so this itself, right, what I want to check next is to see if there are any retracement levels that lines up with this zone. So this is the highest point and this is the lowest point, right? So in Fibonacci retracement, if we're trying to find a resistance, we need to identify the highest point as our starting point, right? So the starting reference point, and our ending point would be our lowest point, right? So that's the ending reference point. So another thing that we need to take note of when we do Fibonacci retracements is that we try and identify very clean moves. So what I mean by this is that we want to identify immediate moves. So if I were to trace out the whole price movement, you can see this whole move here, right? So assuming that we are at some point in time here, right? Let's say we are here and we're trying to find retracement levels for support. What we need to keep in mind is that given that this is the most immediate move, right? We want to take the retracement from this low to high. So trying to find support levels, right, if it's in a bullish market structure, and trying to find resistance level in a bearish market structure. What would not be wise, right? Looking at this whole move, you can see that this can technically be a retracement point as well, right? So if you take a look at this move here, right, you can see that this is the lowest point and this is the highest point. You can actually take this point to calculate the retracement level, but what would be probably a better practice is to take it from here, right? So one way to gauge it is just to load the trend line on the retracement tool, right? So if I load the trend line, you can see that this trend line itself will give you the general idea, right? So think of it as a line of best fit. So if you draw it from, let's say, the better practice point, which is from these 2 points, right? If I were to darken the trend line, so let's just put it, let's say in pink, right? You can see this is the trend line, right? This acts as a really nice line of best fit. Whereas if you were to shift the starting point here, you can see that there's this whole portion where price just neglects this trend line, right? So it just whip in and out of it here, right? So this would not be good practice, right? Even though it is still valid. Okay, so this is another thing to keep in mind when you're using the retracement levels. So again, right, what we're trying to do here, let me just close the replay button, right? So back to where we left off, we were here, right? So we have this whole move down. This is the most immediate move down. So we're trying to find just within this whole leg itself, if there are any levels that line up with this zone. So one thing to note about retracement levels, or another thing to note rather, right, it's that retracement levels themselves, right, they are at almost every interval, right? So if you take a look at these levels, if I take this retracement levels, open up the default, you can see that 3823.6, right? At almost every interval, there is a level. So essentially what we try to do here is to identify the zones first, identify the general direction just based on market structure. And if these zones line up with a retracement, then that'll be great, right? But we try not to force one. So when price comes into this area, right, if you have another way you can use this is that, let's say if we have a retracement level, let's say 61.8 retracement, right? Sitting nicely within this zone, you can see that this area, right, sits within the 61.8 and 50% retracement. So if you're trying to find, or you're trying to take a slight move down, right? So waiting for price to enter the zone before that reversal. If you're taking quick scalps, right, one way would be, if you're looking to keep a stop loss tight, to put this retracement, to put this levels above the retracements, right, in a short, right? If you're looking at a longer term setup, right, you might want to consider putting it outside of market structure, right? So if this is the last high that broke the low, then this high itself, we can actually use this as a reference to put our stop loss. Okay, so that's another thing to watch on retracements, right? So right now we've identified the retracement level. Another thing that you can also use would be our extensions. So extensions are basically zigzag patterns. We're trying to project where prices might potentially end up. So in this case, this is your extension level. So you can see this, just use this 3 points, right? So if price forms a new low, then of course we will have to adjust our extension levels along the way, right? But that's the idea. So we have 127 extension lining up with this zone as well. Okay, so that's one, right? So if price pulls back into this area, you can see that currently it is sitting on, again, right, at every level. Once we see how price reacted previously, right, we have this, again, support turn resistance level. Resistance turn support level here, right? And even prior to that, right, we're seeing that move before price continues to the upside. Okay, so that's on euro dollar, right? Another setup that we would like to take a look at is gold. So let's take a look at that, right? So again, on the higher time frame, so you can see this area on gold, right? So on the higher time frame first, we can see that price came into a resistance area. We saw 3 point, right? And if we're to put it just in support resistance level, you can see that price broke, or currently it's testing this zone, right? The last high that we have here. Okay, so this area basically, right? So a zone that we want to work with, right? If you put it in candlestick, you can see 3 equal highs being formed, right? And if you take a look at the weekly time frame, right? Previously you were seeing bullish move, higher lows, higher highs, pushing into this resistance area. That's the picture on the weekly, right? We're seeing the same thing happen as well, right? So in terms of the bullish structure here. So we probably have to adjust our channel slightly, but you can see that what happened, right? So prices were holding in the bullish channel, pushing into the resistance area, and now we're seeing a break below the channel. We're also seeing a break below the support area. So previously we highlighted this region as a support to watch, right? So if we're seeing price breaking below this level, right, then it's a sign that this resistance area on the higher time frame, right, it's holding. So another thing to watch, right? So in this case, what we have here is that on the support area, right, price broke below this region. That's the picture on the daily time frame, right? And if you move to the 4 hours time frame, you can see again here. So let me just remove the rest of the markings, right? But you can see essentially we have an ascending channel that price broke below. And again, ascending channel, for it to be considered valid, we need a tap of support and resistance twice, right? We're saying a move of it here. Price coming in to test this zone twice, and again on the resistance level twice. So just in terms of support resistance levels, looking at where we are now, right, you're seeing bearish movement, lower lows, lower highs being formed. And if you look at it just based on this move itself, you can see that this was a previous resistance and support area, right? So I'll just remove the support level because this is no longer valid, right? Price broke below it. I'll remove all these markings as well. So just looking at where we are, right, in terms of what's still relevant, right? So we have a support or resistance level here. We have the channels support, right? Price breaking below this. So this is the whole move here. So taking a retracement of this move from high to low, you can see that we are also seeing bearish moves, right? Lower lows, lower highs being formed. You also have bearish structure here, right? Again, in a channel. So this is a resistance of a channel, which is basically around this zone, right? So, and you can see that this area has been tested again a few times. So this is one region to watch, right? So again, if you take a retracement of this from high to low, we have the 50% retracement within this zone. Another thing to check, our extension level, zigzag pattern. So this is your zigzag pattern. These are the 3 points. So when we do this, right, again, we're trying to project the extension level, 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3. You can see the 100% extension there. Okay, so this is another zone. I think that price could push deeper into this region before we see a further move down, right, if the order continues to be more bullish. And also, of course, there's a fundamentals for it, right? So if concerns of the debt ceiling starts to ease, right, then that's another thing that we need to watch out for. Okay, so yeah, so that's the picture on gold. Right, so if there are any other requests, right, do put your questions under the questions chat, right? If there are no other requests, then that's all that we have for today, right? So I'll just leave this on for about 1 minute. And also, if you guys have any questions with regards to accounts, or if you want to sign up for the next session, right, you can just go to vantagemarkets.com/webinars, right? Over there, we have the schedule and speakers. So you can just sign up for that for the sessions on via our website. If you have any other support or any other questions that you'd like to ask us, right, you can also email us at support@vantagemarkets.com. Okay, so that's all that we have for today, right? I see that we have no other questions, right? So if no other questions, right, that's all. Thanks everyone, right? Have a great weekend, and we will catch you guys again next week.